Hello, everyone, and welcome to the official All Things Watched podcast, where we talk all things movies, television, streaming originals, and everything in between. Now, this podcast is, of course, a complimentary podcast to the YouTube channel of the same name, All Things Watched. So if you're watching this on YouTube, then go ahead and click that subscribe button and then head on over to your favorite podcasting platform and check out the podcast and follow the podcast if you're interested in these open spoiler movie talks. And then, of course, the same reverse versa. If you're listening to this on the podcast, then head on over to the YouTube channel, click that subscribe button, and if you want, leave a like. It really helps the channel and the podcast grow with the algorithms and all that good stuff. And this is a really cool podcast for anyone that is, of course, a movie fan, television fan, or streaming original fan like myself, and all that cool stuff. So this is actually episode 21. This is our 21st podcast, and in this one, we will be doing an open spoiler discussion of the brand new movie, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. Now, this movie, of course, sees Tom Cruise reprising his role as Ethan Hunt, and of course, we have an awesome addition to the cast, Haley Atwell, who portrays the character known as Grace, and then we have some returning faces as well. We have Rebecca Ferguson, who's in this film as well, and, I'm really fresh with Rebecca Ferguson, just coming off her, what I think probably the greatest 2023 television series so far, the Apple Plus original series, simply titled Silo, and of course Rebecca Ferguson was the lead in that series, and there's absolutely no questions as to why, because she is just a force to be reckoned with when it comes to her performances and her acting and all that good stuff. And just like in Silo, in this movie, she delivers. She does not disappoint. In fact, I wish she was in this movie a little bit more. But I actually did not see the previous film, which I think was titled Fallout, Mission Impossible Fallout. I've seen the first four, and I've seen this one, but I did miss, I think, 5 and 6. I might have seen 5, but I can't quite think of it, so I'm not 100% sure that I did, but I definitely seen the first 4, and of course now this one. So, as far as I know, Rebecca Ferguson played a big role in the previous Mission Impossible movie called Fallout, so I actually, like I said, I never seen that one, so I really can't comment or talk about it. So I love her as the actor, but I never really got to see the character development of her character because, like I said, she was actually in a previous movie, so I never really seen that part of it. But all in all, I still love the performance that Rebecca Ferguson gave in this movie. Now, this movie was directed by Christopher McQuarrie and was written by Bruce Geller, Eric I'm not even sure how to pronounce that word, Jendrison, and of course Christopher McQuarrie as well, and all that good stuff. And this is the 7th installment to the Mission Impossible movie. So how these podcasts works and how these open spoiler discussions work is we sort of break down the movie scene by scene, and we talk about things that we did like, we talk about things that we didn't like, and then after we do the scene by scene breakdown, then we sort of give like our general thoughts about the film, just in general. But usually with the movie open spoiler discussions, the scene by scene takes up the most time because, it's a movie. It's not like a television series, which is only 30, 40, 50 minutes long. Especially with this Mission Impossible movie, this is actually 2.5 hours long. And right off the bat, if I were to nitpick this movie and have maybe a small complaint about Mission Impossible Episode 7, I think my biggest complaint would be the length of this movie. I did think that this movie was very long, and I did find at times it was very dragged out. So with that being said, let's just go right ahead and jump into our scene-by-scene breakdown of the movie, talk about the things we loved about it, talk about the things we hated about it, and just really sort of fanboy out about this movie, because that's what the podcast is all about. It's all about movies and television and how we love movies and television. So this movie, Mission Impossible 7, Dead Reckoning Part 1, actually opens, what I thought was actually a pretty cool sequence, honestly. I really like the opening sequence because it starts, and the very first scene is a submarine, and we see this submarine underwater. And of course, there's a bunch of different gadgets and a bunch of different types of technology going on here. But ultimately, I think what you get from this scene, from this opening sequence, is that you learn that there's this key which seems to unlock some form of program or algorithm or sort of artificial intelligence type computer. Whatever this technology is at this point in time, we don't really know. All we know is that in order to use it or activate it, you sort of have to have this key, and that of course when the key is turned inside of this submarine, it activates this thing or this computer or whatever it is. Like we said, we don't really know at this point, and of course a bunch of stuff ends up happening, I think, which the people of the submarine did not intend to happen. Essentially what happens is everything goes wrong, so to speak, and the submarine ends up exploding, and then, of course, everybody on board obviously ends up dying. They end up drowning or dying in the explosion, whichever happens, and, of course, all their bodies ends up floating up underneath the ice. So I really thought the CGI, the special effects, and that whole opening sequence, I actually thought that was done quite well. I really liked it. It was very interesting, and it also really did a good job at setting up, I guess you can say, sort of setting up the objective mission that will come shortly after the opening sequence, which is that key. And we learn that, of course, Ethan has to, Ethan's mission, of course, will be to recover that key and whatnot, and have to use his skills, talent, and resources to retrieve this key. But I just thought it did a really good job at showing the power of this key and how it seems like this new technology or this new algorithm or artificial intelligence or whatever this computing power is, it shows that it sort of has a mind of its own, because when the submarine launches the missile and attacks, the missile actually comes back around and ends up, basically, the submarine ends up shooting itself, but unintentionally. And of course, this is because that computer basically ends up changing the coordinates of the missile, basically making it friendly fire upon itself, basically destroying the submarine and everybody on it. But once again, I thought it did a really good job at showing that whatever this piece of technology is, it just simply cannot really be controlled. So I really appreciated that, and I thought they did a really good job. And like I said, the special effects were really cool, especially when you see the bodies sort of floating upside down with the ice right above them. They're not actually able to go up to the surface. They can only, float up to the ice because they're in that ocean and whatnot. But like I said, I really loved that opening sequence, and I thought it was really cool. And it wasn't dragged out either. I thought they did, like, it was good paced, it was good writing, it was good directing, and it just looked really cool all in all. But in terms of the rest of the movie, with that key and that sort of mission of Ethan having to recover that key, I actually kind of wish they did a little bit more with the key. But then again, at the same time, this is only a part one, so I do know that there will be a part two eventually. But I did feel like the only cool sequence we get of that key and really, exercising the power of that key was that opening sequence. And I kind of wish they had to do a little bit more with that throughout the whole movie. I think it would have been really cool if, they had to use the key maybe to blow up certain locations. This is an action movie, of course, and all these Mission Impossible movies are always about Ethan having to, literally save the world by going on these missions, which technically and realistically would be impossible. Hence the name Mission Impossible. Ethan at this point is a lot like a superhero. I almost put the Mission Impossible franchise almost on the same level as Fast and the Furious, but not quite. I think Fast and the Furious went a little bit further and become even more silly than what Mission Impossible was. Mission Impossible, I don't think is silly like Fast and the Furious, but I still think it makes you have to suspend your reality more than what you would probably have to. I apologize if you hear shaking. I'm drinking a green shake, so just let me take a sip here for a second. I tried to stay hydrated when we're doing these long format conversations. Okay, so we see Ethan now. After that scene with the submarine, we then see Ethan, and he's talking to someone, and of course this is where he's going to get his mission. There he basically has a package delivered with a bunch of names and photos and targets, and of course a video recording, which actually says it will self-destruct, so to speak, after he's done listening to it, and after a certain amount of time, basically the recording self-destructs, just basically to destroy the evidence. And this is where he's briefed then, and he's sort of briefed, and, he learns a little bit about the mission. He's told that he needs to try to recover the key and whatnot, so that was really cool. And during all of this, we sort of get what I think is, I can't remember actually if it was an actual flashback or if it was actually the present day. I think it was a flashback, though. I think it was a flashback or maybe it was present day. I can't quite remember now. I haven't seen Mission Impossible now for a few days, so I can't quite remember if it was a flashback to the previous movie or if it was actually him continuing the story. But he ends up going to having to go to the desert, and he goes there trying to find Alsaf, who's portrayed by Rebecca Ferguson. And like I said, this was a really cool sequence. And now that I'm thinking about it, if my memory serves me right, I do think it was actually a part of the story. Like, I don't think it was a flashback. I think it was present day. So Ethan ends up going on the hunt looking for his old partner and whatnot. And I actually really loved when he does find her. And once again, this was a really cool sequence as well. And all of this, by the way, happens before the opening title card comes up. There's like a 20-minute opening before the name or the title of the movie actually comes up, before the Mission Impossible logo comes up or the song or anything like that. So anyways, Ethan gets all the information. He learns everything that he needs to know about the mission, and then he basically goes on the hunt for his old partner, Faust, and he ends up finding her. She'd be sort of tucked away in this little spot out in the middle of nowhere, in this like little to me, it seemed like a little like abandoned town, or sort of like a town maybe that was destroyed or blown up at some point, I guess. And she's just out there all by herself. Seems like she doesn't have really any form of technology or anything with her, or at least not anything that would potentially, that they would be able to trace her with or anything. To me, I got the impression that she's out here in hiding. Like I said, I didn't see Mission Impossible Fallout, so I don't actually really know why her character is there, or how, or what the significance is of her being there. But I can only assume that she's there to hide out and whatnot, and all that good stuff. And so Ethan ends up going to look for him, and of course there's other people looking for her as well. But we did get a really cool action sequence here with Rebecca Ferguson's character. She puts down the eye patch and she shows her talent as a marksman, and she uses that sniper rifle and really just does a really cool job at just taking out some of the people coming on horse and buggy and whatnot. And this actually or not horse and buggy, but coming on the horses, chasing Ethan. So she's basically helps Ethan, and she shoots down a lot of these enemies that are coming as well, looking for her. It put me in mind of another film as well, and now I can't think of it now that we're actually here. I just thought about it. I can picture the scene, but I can't picture the title of the movie. But there was another movie that started off very similar to this as well. I'm trying to remember what it was, but I can remember that the person just basically walks right up there and it doesn't matter. I can't remember now anyways. But this opening sequence reminded me a lot of another movie anyways. That's the point of me saying that. And so that whole action sequence was really done really well. I loved seeing Ethan and Faust's character sort of working together. It was really cool to see Tom Cruise and Rebecca Ferguson's dynamic and them sort of playing off of each other. I'm definitely going to go back and watch Fallout because, like I said, it was... I can't even imagine how cool it would be if I would assume that she was a big character in that movie. So I would love to see like an entire movie of the two of them working together. So anyways, then after we get that cool desert sequence, then we come back to this program, of course, which we know it comes back to an intelligence agency in Washington, D.C., and of course they're sort of talking about this program, talking about the key. They seem to have intelligence about it and whatnot, so they're of course talking about how they sort of need to retrieve it and all that good stuff. And it seems like they are going to be the ones that are going to recruit some of the great assassins, some of the great special agents, because they want to get the key for themselves, and they really need to get their hands on it, I guess, for the sake of not having like a terrorist organization or something get it. But there is a really cool sequence here as well, where one of the members in this meeting is actually Ethan, is actually Tom Cruise's character, Ethan, and he's in there, but he's not recognizable because of the fact that he's wearing one of those faces. And I actually had forgotten all about that, and that was a big callback to the original trilogy, actually. I can't remember if it was Mission Impossible 1 or 2, which is the first time we see that, where they have the ability to look like somebody else. And for a moment, I actually sort of forgot that I was watching Mission Impossible, and it made me think about the Skrulls, Marvel's Secret Invasion. It made me think that maybe we're actually watching Secret Invasion here, but of course we're not. We're watching Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning. I had forgotten about the fact that that Ethan had the ability to sort of change his appearance to look like someone else. So once again, I really thought that this opening sequence was done really well. Two, I thought that the writing of it was done really well. I thought that I thought that the scene itself was really cool, especially when Ethan ends up releasing like all this sort of gas. I guess you would say almost like a sleeping gas type thing, and he ends up taking over the room and then revealing that he is who he, revealing that it's actually him, Ethan, and he basically ends up talking to one of the members there, and it was just a really cool sequence all in all. It's really cool, just special effects, seeing him. He's wearing like the gas mask and everything, and whatnot, and he takes it out and he puts it on, and then he releases all this green smoke. And everybody ends up going to sleep except, obviously Ethan and then the person that was wearing the gas mask. So then he starts to have a conversation with him and basically talking about him and how, he's going to go on this mission and whatnot. And, he has to go on this mission, so to speak, no matter what, and all that good stuff. And I just thought it was really cool. And then we go back to the desert sequence where where we learn that Faust is actually still alive. She's not dead. She's still alive and well. And so it sort of seems to me, I got the impression that maybe Ethan is actually protecting her at this point. I mean, because we learned that she actually has one part of the key, obviously, which is very important. So that will obviously play a big role later on in the future and whatnot. And then, of course, we go back to the present day or whatever it is, I guess, where once again, basically Ethan reveals that he has the key and whatnot, and that's basically when the opening sequence comes, and then we get all the names, the opening credits, and this actually happens like probably 20 or 25 minutes into the movie, so it's a really long opening, but it was still a lot of fun overall, and I really like the opening sequences. And like I said, I actually wish that Rebecca Ferguson was in the movie a little bit more. She is in the movie for probably a good hour, maybe hour and a half, like not every single scene, but she's in a lot of it, and then she ends up getting killed about halfway through it. And that was one problem that I did have with the movie. I did find that that when she dies, I found that was very predictable, but it was still fun to watch all in all, but it was very predictable. So then after that scene, we sort of see the reuniting of Ethan and his team, and he reveals to them that he has the key. Sorry there, I had to take another drink. But he reveals to his team that he has the key, and he shows it to them. And of course, they got a bunch of really cool technology, like this special pair of like sunglasses type thing that can actually monitor people and sort of track people, and so he can use it to identify people. And his team, of course, is made up of Luther Stickel, who's portrayed by Ving Rhames, and of course Benji Dunn, who's portrayed by Simon Pegg. And once again, those characters were awesome. I thought those actors did a great job portraying those characters, and they were really cool, and they're in the whole entire movie as well, and they really help Ethan on his mission, on this impossible mission. And they really do a good job at, basically being his eyes and his ears and being his backup and all that good stuff. So then when we skip forward a little bit further, then we get to another really cool sequence, which takes place, I think it was in an airport or a train station, but I'm pretty sure it was an airport, where Ethan, and this is actually where Hayley Atwell's character is introduced, and she is basically like this secret agent as well, who was also trying to capture the key. She's also sort of after the key. I think she comes from the British, some form of European or British, special agency or whatnot, whatever it is. But I can't help but see Peggy Carter every time I see Hayley Atwell, especially in this type of movie like Mission Impossible. I can't help but see Agent Peggy Carter, because they're almost playing the same role, really, because Agent Carter, of course, is an special agent as well. So even though, Agent Carter has nothing to do with Mission Impossible, I just can't help but see her as Agent Carter and whatnot. And also Captain Britain, I believe she played as well in the What If series, and also in Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness. So, every time I see her, it's just hard not to see her superhero character, especially in this movie when she's playing the same role, basically, as what she did in Marvel, where she's a special agent. But it was still good to see her all around, and I personally thought she was a great addition to the cast, and she was actually my favorite, probably one of my favorite characters in this one, with the exception, of course, of Rebecca Ferguson. I'm just such a big fan of Rebecca Ferguson that I think that she's probably going to be my favorite character. In pretty well everything she's in, she'd probably always be a standout for me. She'd be one of my favorites. So I really like this sequence, all in all, this airport sequence, but this was the first time that I felt that maybe the movie was dragging on a little bit longer than what it really needed to be, because this sequence keeps going for quite a long time. And of course, there's going to be action sequences and everything. This is a Mission Impossible movie, obviously. So of course, Ethan ends up having to help Haley's character, and Haley portrays a character known as Grace as well. Her character in the movie is Grace. Like I said, she's just an awesome action star. So Ethan basically ends up having to help her, and of course they do. They end up escaping, which we know is going to happen anyways. But while all this stuff is happening, we sort of have other agencies sort of figuring out who Ethan is. So and also figuring out who Grace is, and it's almost like they're a bunch of spies who are being spied on type thing. But like I said, seeing their dynamic, Cruise and Haley Atwell's dynamic, I thought that both did a great job with their performances and whatnot. And then we come to a scene where they're basically sat down. Once they're together, they're sort of sat down and they're talking to each other. And this was another scene that I thought was really long and dragged out. That that talking scene, and I just felt like they could have easily shaved off 5 or 10 minutes from that one, but they never. Like I said, it was still cool to see the action and stuff, but in between the scenes. But I did find that when the action stopped, the movie did very much feel like it was very long. The movie is 2 hours and 34 minutes, which is not including credits, and so they could have easily shaved this down, to me at least, to at least a 2 hour movie. They could have easily cut a half hour out of this movie. To me, it was almost like they were trying to tell part one and part two almost into one. But like I said, when the action kicks in, the action is great, but in between the action, I just felt the talking scenes, the character development and all that stuff, I just found that stuff was way too long. But we did get a really cool chase scene here, which once again was a little bit silly, because Ethan and Grace is actually handcuffed together, and they're here, racing through the streets, which I think is over in Europe and whatnot. And this is also when we're introduced to Vanessa Kirby and her character. And I think in the movie, or at least in the credits, she's just referred to as the White Widow. But I thought she did a great job as well. She was actually a standout in this movie. Also, I think her performance was spot on as well. I think she did a really good job with what she was given. She was on par with Haley Atwell and Rebecca Ferguson and Ving Rhames and Simon Pegg. She was definitely on par with all of those characters. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I don't know if it was Vanessa Kirby or it might have actually been Pam Clementif who was introduced here in this chase. Hang on, let me try to remember. I can't remember, actually. No, I think it was Vanessa Kirby that was introduced in this chase, because Pam doesn't really come in until later on. She portrays a character known as Paris, but I don't think that she came in until maybe the second half of the movie. I could be wrong. Maybe that was her in the car chase. I'm getting mixed up in those two characters now. Maybe it was Pam that was introduced. Actually, the more I think about it, I think that it was Pam that was introduced in, because Vanessa Kirby played a character that eventually Haley Atwell would use the same technology and the same disguise that Ethan uses when he puts somebody else's face on. And I think Grace ended up taking Vanessa Kirby's character. So Vanessa was sort of like, yeah, that's right. Okay, yeah. So that was Pam's character, and she portrayed Paris. So it was Paris that was introduced in this car chase. This is when we're first introduced to her character, and that's roughly about an hour in, maybe 55 minutes to an hour. But either way, that's when she got introduced. I really loved her performance as well. She's obviously a superstar, especially with action, with the action franchise. I mean, she was in Guardians of the Galaxy 2 and 3, and also the Guardians of the Galaxy special presentation, the holiday special. And of course, she was the star of the show in that one. Her and Drax, who was UFC fighter, Dave Bautista, he portrayed Drax. So their chemistry was absolutely awesome as well. So it was really nice to see her sort of branch away from the MCU and get her show here and get her chance to shine here in this movie. And so after all that sequence, the car chase and after the introduction of Paris and Pam Clementieff's character, then we learn that it's actually Fast, Rebecca Ferguson's character, who ends up saving them during the car chase, basically, and that's how they escape because of the help that they get from Fast. Sorry, I'm having a moment here. I got a bunch of notes here, but I'm trying to piece it all together and remember each of the scenes. But that was, like I said, it was a really cool scene, and they had a really nice scene too when they're in a boat going through this canal. Like I said, it was just the scenery itself was really nice. The backdrop was nice. The environment was really nice. All the older sort of like antique type buildings, it all looked really nice. And whatnot, and so then they sort of get to another scene here. Then when they're sort of talking and trying to figure out what they're going to do, and then of course we end up going to a scene then when Ethan ends up meeting the villain of the movie. I'm not 100% sure if he knew at that point in time that was the villain, or if it's not revealed until later on. So I can't quite remember at that time if he's introduced to if he knew that he was the villain or whatnot. But they end up meeting at this what seems to be sort of like a nightclub, or at least a nightclub type environment. And this is actually when we're introduced to Vanessa Kirby's character, who, like I said in the credit, she's known as the White Widow. And here in this scene, we basically have all the main characters here now. We have Ethan, we have the White Widow, we have Haley Atwell, Grace, obviously Tom Cruise, Ethan Hunt, and we have all the characters basically here in one spot. Rebecca Ferguson and her character is here as well, and we basically see and learn a little bit more about the key and sort of what everybody's relationship. Pam Clementieff's character Paris is here as well, and you start to see basically what it's turning into is basically this giant arms deal. Now, of course, Ethan and Grace are only here to basically steal the key, whereas where some of the others are sort of there to make a transaction because they want to sort of buy the power. And it also seems like the nightclub, at least is very symbolic to this computer technology or this AI, because they have a bunch of what the machinery looks like. They sort of have that playing on the screens in the nightclub while all the the music's going and everything. So I can't remember quite if that was exactly, if it actually was the program being used, or if they were just sort of having the stuff going to symbolize the program. I can't quite remember, but either way, it was, you could tell that it was the program, and with the key. So basically, they're here now, and they have both halves of the key, because Ethan has a half, and he got it from Rebecca Ferguson's character, and then of course the other gentleman has the other half, and that's basically the whole idea behind the transaction, is that he wants to buy the second half of the key, so then he'll own the whole key. And then he'll be able to, use the power of that technology and use that technology, or that form of artificial intelligence or algorithm, whatever it is, that technology. And that's the whole reason why he wants to buy that half the key. I do think it's worth mentioning the villain as well. I just sort of glazed over that, but the character in this movie that is the villain is a character known as Gabriel, and Gabriel is portrayed by Esai Morales, and honestly I think Morales does a phenomenal job at his portrayal of this character, because the character is, I wouldn't go as far as saying that the character is intimidating. It's not a scary character, but it is a character that is very highly trained, with skills and with hand-to-hand combat. So he's able to fight really good, a lot like Ethan and, of course, the rest of the Mission Impossible cast. But also, I think what makes this character really menacing is how far he's willing to go to get what he wants, in order to get that power and to keep his power and whatnot. He's willing to kill whoever it takes. He's willing to, turn off that moral compass to get whatever it is that he wants. So right after they meet with Gabriel, and we sort of have this meeting, which is sort of like in that nightclub and whatnot, we end up going into another running chase sequence, except this time is on foot. Is not like a car or boat or plane or train or anything like that. It's just they basically all the characters end up getting split up, and they end up having to run basically for their lives. Specifically, Ethan, Fast, and of course Grace, who are sort of on the same team, and they're sort of squaring off against the White Widow, Paris, and then of course Gabriel himself, who's the main villain. And this is the first time I found in the movie that the movie was most predictable. We knew exactly what was going to happen because it was just so predictable. And I think a lot of that has to do with the editing, the way that they edited the scene. You know, you have Tom, well, not Tom, you have Tom's character, Ethan, running through the streets and through the alleyways, trying to, you know, catch up to Gabriel and whatnot. And of course, obviously, they keep cutting back and forth to him running, and he's running into obstacles, you know, trying to fight off Paris and the other character and whatnot. So he's like, there's always an obstacle where he just can't get there, and he keeps running and running and running. And so while he's running to try to get to this location, which is actually sort of a bridge in behind all the alleyways, we have Gabriel who's fighting against Grace, and Grace is pretty well losing this battle. She's just not able to keep up with Gabriel, and of course he ends up overcoming her, and he actually ends up throwing her sort of down over the stairs, and it seems like he's going to kill her, or he's about to kill her, when Rebecca Ferguson's character ends up stepping in fast, and she ends up, of course, basically defending Grace, and she starts to fight against Gabriel. But unfortunately for her, she ends up losing the battle, and she becomes, the first casualty of the movie, or at least the first real big casualty of the movie. And so it was really hard. It was really sad to see that, like I said, I never seen the previous Mission Impossible movie, so I'm not fully connected to the character, maybe like what most people will be if you've seen the previous one with her in it for the entire time. But like I said, I'm such a huge fan of Rebecca Ferguson that it was really hard to see her character go, and I would have liked to see her in the entire movie, but she was still in the movie for the most part, and that was roughly, give or take a minute or two maybe, but that was roughly about an hour and 39 minutes into the movie when she basically ends up getting killed. But she sacrifices her life so that Grace can survive. So I guess you could say to some degree Grace is sort of replacing that character, not in the sense that not in the sense that Haley Atwell is a better performer than Rebecca Ferguson. I think they're both excellent performers, but just in the sense of the Mission Impossible franchise, it seems like, at least for Dead Reckoning Part 1 and Part 2, it seems like Haley Atwell would be that main female lead next to Ethan. She's a great fighter too, but she's still not quite as good, I don't think, as quite as good as a fighter as fast. But then again, maybe she is, because really they both end up losing the battle to Gabriel, and it's just Grace only survives because Fast intervenes. But then of course Fast ends up dying because nobody intervenes, just because Ethan is not able to get there in time. But it was still a really sad scene. It's really tough to see her get killed. But once again, it was just excuse me, it was just an excellent performance by Rebecca, and she did such an awesome job portraying that character Fast, and also did a great job with the action sequences as well. All the characters, had some really good action sequences, and I really like that one. She looked really badass, when she had like her knives and whatnot, and really seemed like a real true trained assassin. So I really like that. I really thought that she did a great job, and even the writing of the character I thought was done really well for her, for all the characters really. Even though I wasn't really a huge fan of the story of the Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, I was a big fan of the characters. I thought the character development was pretty good overall, especially for the new characters like Haley Atwell. I really loved her character pretty well right from the moment that I've seen her, so you could really, give that as a sort of a combination between a few things, between the writing but also the performance that Haley gave. So I thought that was really cool, really nice. And then so after that action sequence, of course, after we end up losing Fast, then we end up coming to another sequence, or not a sequence, but another scene here when basically all of our characters sort of regroup, and we have, you have Grace, you have Ethan, you have Luther who's there, Luther Stickwell, and I think Benji Dunn was there as well, but I could be wrong. But I'm pretty sure Benji was in with them as well. And they're basically planning their next and final part of the mission now, where they want to sort of retrieve the key and retrieve, and get everything back. And they end up discovering through their intelligence and all that stuff, they end up discovering that, they have to make their next move on this moving train, on this locomotive train, which of course you do see that sort of in the trailers. You see in the trailers how how the train is going to play a big part in, in the third act of the movie. They show in the trailers, I think they show the bridge blowing up and whatnot. So of course, all that stuff is going to happen, and that stuff is going to happen, thanks to the trailers. But I will say that I don't think the trailer really gave away the entire movie. It was really, there is still lots that happens in this movie that you don't see in the trailers. But I do think that maybe the trailers gave away some of the best parts of the movie, maybe. But either way, that the train sequence is going to be a big one. And so they start to come up with this plan, and with different situations and scenarios as to how they're going to infiltrate this train, how they're going to recover the key and the missing pieces and whatnot. And it's kind of cool because they kind of like show the sequences as well while they're planning it. Like they sort of show the plan of what they want to do, but then of course they end up going a different route, so to speak. They end up going with a different plan. And then we actually skip ahead and get to the train and get to the train sequence and everything, and then we start to see, the plan take fold. And of course, so we have Grace, who basically ends up taking over Vanessa Kirby's character, using that technology where they can basically wear somebody else's face and make themselves look different and look like someone else. So they end up, she ends up basically going undercover on the train, and she basically becomes she ends up becoming the White Widow, so that they can infiltrate the train and basically try to get the key back from Gabriel. And of course, Gabriel ends up getting on the train because they had him, I think he was in like some kind of sleeping apparatus or something like that. He was asleep, and he ends up waking up once the train is actually moving or something like that. So I'm guessing it was because of like a security thing. Maybe they had to sneak him on the train because the train is technically not it's not really like a public train, so to speak. I think it was some form of like special secretive, I don't know, some kind of train, whatever it was. I don't think anybody was really supposed to be on it, so that's how he got on. He sort of snuck on by by putting himself into this state of unconsciousness, whether he was asleep or not, and then they sort of take over the train. And that's basically where they decide that they're going to make the deal. Is either that, or I can't quite remember. It's either that or the White Widow, Vanessa Kirby's character, already had the key or something like that. So he went in there because he wanted to steal the key from her. But little did he know that Ethan Hunt was going to also infiltrate the train as well. And then, of course, he also did not know that Grace was going to end up taking the form or the face of the White Widow. So he really didn't know anything about the mission itself. He just went there to infiltrate the train and to try to get the key and whatnot. So that was a really cool sequence as well, just seeing him come to and watching Gabriel sort of take over the train. And of course he was there with Paris. She's kind of like his right-hand man in this one. So it was really cool to see that and seeing his team take over the train while also knowing that Ethan's team now is going to infiltrate as well. So it was just really cool. I thought it was pretty clever how they got in there and whatnot. But by the time they get in there, of course, Grace is already on board, I believe. Either that or she sneaks on board like pretty well right away after, and she ends up putting on the mask of the White Widow, and she does it just in time as well because she almost gets caught. One of Gabriel's men is like knocking on the door. He's sort of getting impatient, and he just sort of wants to get this deal or get this, get all this stuff done with and over with so that they can, basically move on. Excuse me. So, but then of course we end up learning that, even Gabriel is sort of to some degree working for someone as well. But of course Gabriel will end up backstabbing them, and he will end up taking the key for himself. But I just thought that whole sequence was pretty cool, seeing Grace get in place, seeing Grace, take over Vanessa Kirby's character. I just thought that was really fun, really cool, really interesting. And that sort of goes on for a little while. Once again, just a bunch of dialogue going back and forth and whatnot. And I actually thought that Ethan might have been already on the train as well. Like, even though I know they edited it in a way where it looked like he was trying to board the train, a part of me wondered that if Grace was already on there, then maybe Ethan was on there as well. But it turns out that it wasn't Ethan. He wasn't actually on the train. He ends up having to get on the train later on. And he does this, of course, by another scene that's on one of the trailers as well. The trailer when you see him on the motorcycle and he basically flies off the top of the mountain using a parachute. Well, that's essentially how Ethan ends up getting on the train. But once again, this is another scene, the beginning of the train sequence, once again, I found was another scene that was just dragged out too long with all the back and forth. I thought it was really cool when we seen Gabriel take over the train, but then the back and forth that he has with all the different characters on there. I just thought that that just went on for way too long. They didn't need to drag that out any longer than what was necessary, but they did. Like I said, there's a few moments in between the action sequences when I felt like they could really shave down, really shave down the time. Definitely shave 5 or 10 minutes off each, probably every scene in between. Maybe not 10 minutes, but at least 5 minutes. And I think that would have brought the movie back to probably like 2 hours and 15 minutes, or even 2 hours and 10 minutes. And I think it would have been even more enjoyable for me. I mean, maybe you've seen it and loved it, but for me, I think I would have liked it a little bit more if they had a shave 10, 15, maybe even 20 minutes off of the movie as a whole. But anyways, we go through all that banter between him and I believe it's a government agent at that time that Gabriel's talking to, and he basically ends up killing him. Well, actually, I think this person that he's talking to, I don't think it's a government agent. I think he's actually the person, now that I'm thinking about it, that actually created that AI or that algorithm or whatever it is that key powers. He was the creator of it, and he basically tells Gabriel that he's the only person in the world that really knows what that key unlocks. And he also tells Gabriel about the malfunction, which is a great callback to the opening sequence, to the submarine. He tells Gabriel that, when they tried to use the power, then that power or algorithm or AI sort of did its own thing and actually turned on the crew, which ended up ultimately destroying them. So he's sort of telling Gabriel that even if you have the key and even if you have access to all this power, there's a really good chance that you're not going to be able to control it. It basically almost has a mind of its own, and it has capabilities that simply cannot be controlled by Gabriel or his team. So I did like that part of it, even though I did feel like it was dragged out a little bit longer than what was really necessary. I did appreciate the fact that they, took the time to go into that and they showed all that and whatnot. And then, of course, that whole back and forth banter and sort of Gabriel taking over the train basically all ends with him recovering the two pieces of the key, and he puts them together, and now Gabriel has the key, and now he has access to all that power. And of course Grace is still in here, but she's disguised as Vanessa Kirby's character, and she realizes now that she's probably in a little bit over her head. For one, she's there with Gabriel, and Gabriel is an extremely good fighter, but also because she sees how far Gabriel's willing to go. He just killed this person. He took over a train, and she also realizes the amount of power and capabilities that he has with this key. I don't think that Grace fully understood what they could do. I don't know if any of them really fully understood the powers that came with the key, other than maybe Gabriel after the creator of it sort of explained it to him. But I don't really know. Maybe they did understand the power of it. Maybe they did know. I mean, they clearly knew that it was a threat because they put the mission together anyways to recover it. They knew that this was a mission that, if they failed, could end up leading to the destruction of everything, basically. But I don't know that really Grace and even Ethan necessarily knew just, like how it worked. So it's not that I don't think they didn't understand the threat. I just think they didn't necessarily understand how it worked, if that makes sense. But anyways, then we come back to Ethan now. After all that, Ethan is still not quite on the train, and he's still on his motorcycle or dirt bike or whatever it is he's on there, and he's trying to figure out how to get on the train. And it's really funny back and forth, I thought, between him and Benji, who's portrayed by Simon Pegg. Once again, I thought he did a great job as well. I actually kind of wish he was in the movie a little bit more. Him and Luther, I would have liked to see both of them a little more. But Pegg ends up, not Pegg, but Benji ends up telling Ethan that the only way that he can see now for him to get on the train is by flying off of the mountain, using the dirt bike to speed up to enough velocity that when he flies over the cliff, then he can get far enough away to actually use his parachute and sort of paraglide right on down into the train. And of course that is what happens. But before that happens, Vanessa Kirby's character, with actual Vanessa Kirby, like the original character, not Grace who's impersonating her, but the real White Widow, ends up waking up, and she realizes that something's not right. And this is when Haley Atwell sort of needs to start thinking on her toes, because if not, she's going to get caught. So meanwhile, outside the train, Ethan is up on the mountain, and he's getting ready to fly, and he's having all these flashbacks between himself, where he's having all these flashbacks where he's seeing things that happen between him and Grace, but he's also seeing things that had happened between him and Faust, Rebecca's character, and he sort of, it's almost like he has like this little, almost like his life sort of starts to flash before his eyes a little bit before he, really I mean, he's about to drive off a mountain, so you know. So I just thought that that was kind of cool, and that's sort of his motivation for doing it. He out of the flashbacks and whatnot. So he does it, and he pulls the parachute, and of course he ends up going into the train. And of course, the way the story is written, he goes in exactly when he is supposed to, which is no surprise because that's just one of the things that we have to sort of do with the Mission Impossible franchise is suspend our imagination, suspend reality, and sort of let your imagination just flow. Because like I said, he comes into the train literally at the perfect, at the perfect time. Meanwhile, Grace ends up, decrypting a code and whatnot with the transaction, with like $100 million transaction, I believe it was, roughly, or like $1 billion, whatever the transaction was. She ends up deciphering it, but she ends up declining it. She ends up canceling the transaction just because. I guess because she doesn't want to be involved with all that stuff and whatnot, and she ends up telling the people that they can keep the key, and then she ends up basically leaving because she knows. Well, I don't know if she knows, but pretty soon she's going to get caught if she don't get out of there because the real White Widow has come to again and whatnot. But either way, she ends up declining that. Declining the transaction and basically tells the gentleman to keep the key. And then just as she leaves pretty well, then the real White Widow starts to come to and starts walking through the train and whatnot. And of course they realize that there's something off about it, that there's something not right about this, because realistically she probably would not have really done that. And then just as Grace's character leaves, then the real White Widow comes in, and then they realize that Grace, of course, is an imposter. And then, of course, they end up chasing her, and just as they catch up to her, and now she actually looks like Haley Atwell again, so she looks normal again. She doesn't look like, the White Widow anymore. She doesn't look like Vanessa Kirby anymore. And they end up pulling a gun on her, and just as they pull the gun on her, of course, this is when Ethan ends up coming in through the window and basically saves her life. But like I said, it was just, the timing was impeccable. It was just one of those things where you just have to sort of laugh and move on and sort of forgive the storytelling for it. It's just, that's the thing with these Mission Impossible movies. There's just so many coincidences that you just sort of look past it. And that's sort of why I said earlier that I find that these Mission Impossible movies sort of have become a lot like Fast and Furious. Like, it's just gotten so ridiculous at this point that is almost laughable. But I wouldn't say that the Mission Impossible is quite as silly as Fast and Furious. I think the Fast and Furious franchise is still far more sillier than what Mission Impossible is. I still think Mission Impossible does a far better job, with telling their stories and their writing and all that stuff than what Fast and Furious does. And even though both franchises really can oftentimes bring in over $1 billion, and both franchises uses really grade A actors, they really have a great cast every time and whatnot. So then, of course, once Ethan ends up saving Haley, then we see that Gabriel ends up getting possession of the key for himself, and then he ends up leaving. So Ethan and Grace both know that they have to chase after Gabriel, but Ethan sort of tells Grace she needs to stay put and basically try to control the train that they're on. He tells her that the train is rigged in a way that it's not going to stop, so she needs to sort of figure out how to stop the train, and while he goes and chases after Gabriel. So once again, is pretty cool little action sequence and whatnot. And this sort of just keeps going like that pretty well right until we get to the very end of the movie, like the actual finale part, I guess we'll say, which is when, once again, very predictable that Ethan and Gabriel will end up fighting each other on top of the train. Like I said, I can't remember if we seen that part in the trailers, but yeah, we did actually. Now that I'm thinking about it, they do show that part in the trailers. But it was really cool to see them fighting back and forth. The fight was actually not as good as I thought it would be. I thought the choreography would have been better. I thought that they would have had more hand-to-hand combat, considering that they're both very well-trained, soldiers, so to speak. So I really did expect the fight to be better than what it was. But, whatever. I can forgive that part of it. I can forgive that writing. And just as Ethan is about to kill Gabriel, then the two detectives that were sort of coming and going in the movie, they basically end up stopping him from, killing him. Even though he tells them, listen, we need to work together here to get out of this situation and whatnot to sort of save the world. But he does what they're told because they both have guns pulled on him, so he really has no choice. And then of course Gabriel ends up looking at his watch, and he has a timer. And as soon as the timer runs out, then what we see is we see the bridge. The first timer he has is a timer where he has to fall off the train, which once again is another one of those moments where you have to suspend reality and be like, yeah, right, that would never really happen. But that timer was for him to jump off the train into the back of like a dump truck, which has a bunch of padding and whatnot, so he doesn't get hurt. But then he has another timer on the train as well, I think, which was for 2 minutes, where he's going to blow up the railway, causing the train to basically, go over the rails. And this is why Ethan told Grace that he wants her to try her best to stop the train, because he knew that something like this was going to happen. He knew that they wouldn't be able to stop the train anyways, and that in order to, and that, well, very likely something like this would happen. Ethan knew something like this would happen. Either A, the train won't stop and it'll, barrel into a train station, potentially killing a bunch of people, or maybe the actual railway tracks would be destroyed, in which the train would then fall into, or fall off the tracks and whatnot. So they tried to disengage the train manually, but it just, I'm pretty sure it didn't work, or it does work. They do end up manually disengaging some of the carts, but I believe that their speed was just so high, they had such a high velocity that it really didn't make a difference, because they were potentially going to go off of the bridge no matter what. But it was still really cool to see that part. I really enjoyed watching that part. I thought it was cool seeing them, seeing that part of the sequence. It was also kind of smart too, I thought, in terms of the writing, because I think that sort of like the train having sort of like an ABS system, to where if one of the carts become disengaged, then the wheels would lock up and become almost like this ABS, automatic braking system, to try to stop. But then we actually see the bridge explode, and then of course the front of the train ends up blowing up. I thought the camera angles were really cool on this. I feel like they probably really did put a couple cameras on the train, maybe like a GoPro or a couple GoPros or something. I don't know how they filmed it, but I do feel like that was a practical effect more so than a special effect. And I thought it looked really good, it looked really cool and whatnot. And then we get to the very last sequence pretty well, which is Ethan and Grace trying to survive themselves, because they're at the very edge of the train, and the train, each cart of the train keeps falling off, so they basically had to keep running back to the next cart, and then they had to basically keep doing this over and over. And I thought that part of the sequence was another part of the movie that was just dragged on for such a long period of time. And not only that, so they're constantly having to climb and move on up to the next cart, and I just felt like it just would not be humanly possible to do what they were doing. And I don't even mean in the sense of the stunts itself. I just mean I don't think any human would have that kind of energy to be able to pull themselves up that much and that in that many consecutive times. And then something else I thought was very inconsistent was that the only reason why Ethan and Grace actually survived that train wreck was because of Paris. Paris ends up saving them, and the reason why I thought that was very inconsistent was because Paris was trying to kill them for the entire movie, and then when Paris herself is about to die, she ends up saving them. And I just felt like that was very inconsistent. And yes, I do understand that maybe Paris saved them for the sake of trying to get back at Gabriel, so to speak, for killing her and whatnot. I don't know. I still thought it was very inconsistent, but I don't know. Maybe they're relying on that old saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend type thing. I don't know. I just didn't really believe that Paris would have done that. And I thought it was very out of Paris's characteristics. I just didn't buy into it. I didn't think that she would have really saved them. Not for a second. I don't think she would have really saved them. And of course, like I said, this train sequence, by the way, of them trying to get back to safety goes on for almost 10 full minutes. So like I said, it was just dragged on for so long. I was kind of tired of seeing it after the first cart, even the first two carts, but then it just keeps going and going and going. And so I did find that it was very dragged out, and it was very unnecessary. They didn't need to keep showing us the same thing over and over and over and whatnot. And but they did. So between Ethan and of course Paris, they are also able to save Grace. So Ethan survives, Grace survives. Paris unfortunately does not survive. She ends up dying. And then of course we know that Faust has already died. So they're the two biggest casualties, I guess, of this movie, was Faust and Paris. But I don't know if Paris was in a previous Mission Impossible movie or not. I get the impression that she wasn't, but I don't really know. Like I do know, like I said, I knew that Fast was in another one, Rebecca Ferguson's, but I could be wrong. Maybe she was in another one. I'm actually on IMDb anyway, so let me have a quick look to see if she was in any other Mission Impossible. I don't see anything. Wow, I'm actually seeing now that she was actually in the Suicide Squad as well. Palm Clementif. She was in the Suicide Squad as a dancer, but she was uncredited. I actually didn't know that. But I don't see any other Mission Impossible movies listed. Hang on, I'm just going to go to see. And we're going back to 2010 now. Okay, no, so I guess this was her first Mission Impossible movie. I guess they had to have some characters in the movie that were expendable, maybe, you know, because some people had to die, obviously. So I guess Paris was one of those characters that was only in here for a second. But anyways, she ends up saving Ethan, and which, you know, ends up allowing him to save Grace. So Paris saves both of them, really, and whatnot. But then she, excuse me, but then she ends up dying. And yeah, and that's pretty well how the movie ends, pretty well in terms of all the action sequences anyways. The very last scene of the movie, of course, ends up showing that Ethan do have the key, because he ended up, I believe he ended up pickpocketing Gabriel or something. Somehow it turns out that he has the key. I'm not even really 100% sure how he got it, but it turns out that he do have it. And like I said, he must have did like a sleight of hand trick where he managed to steal it from Gabriel and all that stuff. And that's pretty well how the episode ends, or how the movie ends. I mean, there's a few other things that happens as well, but that's pretty well how it goes, how the movie goes. And that is pretty well is a scene-by-scene breakdown, you know, all the big scenes anyways. So what did I like about the movie, and what did I not like about the movie? Well, one thing I did like were the action sequences. I thought the action was really good. I thought the stunts were really good. I even thought the cinematography for a lot of it was done really well. The filmography, a lot of the scenes and the angles, especially with that train sequence, when the train goes off of the bridge. I thought that was filmed in a really cool, clever way, showing us some angles that we potentially have not seen before. Well, I mean, you have seen, you know, angles like that in other movies, but I don't recall seeing anything quite like that in the Mission Impossible movies, except maybe in the movie when Tom Cruise was actually tied to the side of a plane. That was a real effect. That wasn't special effects. He really did that. He's known for doing his own stunts and stuff. So that was sort of, they did a sort of a similar shot in that one as well. But so I really liked a lot of the filmography, cinematography, how it was shot. I thought the writing was pretty good for the most part. I think the best thing about Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 is definitely the characters. I thought the character development was really, really good. Even for the one-offs, even for the new characters like Grace, I thought they wrote her character really well, combined with Hayley Atwell's performance. I thought that was done really, really well too, and you know, really hats off to her for that. I thought she did a phenomenal job. Vanessa Kirby, of course, did a great job. I loved her performance. She was a standout as well. And, of course, Palm Clementif, I'm sorry. She did a phenomenal job as well. I'm not sure if Vanessa Kirby was in any other Mission Impossible. Yes, she was. She was in the last one. She was in Mission Impossible Fallout. I just went under her IMDb. So she was in a previous film as well. So I'll have to go back and watch Mission Impossible 5 and 6. Like I said, I know for sure I've seen the first 3 or 4, I'm sorry, because I did see Ghost Protocol. But I never seen Fallout or Rogue Nation. Part of me thinks maybe I did see Rogue Nation, but I don't know. I don't think I definitely never seen Fallout either way. So it'll be interesting. I would like to go back and see her character and see the significance of her character and how or why she is, like, why is she even significant, really? What is her, you know, role in the other movies and whatnot? So I thought that was cool. She was also in the Fast and the Furious Hobbs and Shaw, so that was one of the few Fast and the Furious, modern day Fast and the Furious movies that I actually really liked. I really liked Hobbs and Shaw. I thought that was a great action movie, and I thought that they did a lot of really good stunts, the choreography, the writing. I thought that was a fun movie all in all, and plus the cast. It was great to see Dwayne Johnson and Jason Statham reprising their roles. So, but in terms of this movie, Mission Impossible, I definitely thought Tom Cruise, of course, being Tom Cruise, I thought the character development, all the characters in the cast did a phenomenal job. And even the writing, for the most part, I thought was done good. But I did feel that the movie dragged on for far too long. The movie did not need to go on as long as what it did. And unfortunately, it did take me, like I said, when the action kicks in, the action is done really, really well. But, it's just like I said, in between the action scenes, and I understand that they do have to give backstory and whatnot, but I don't know. I just felt like some of the sequences just dragged on and on and on. I thought the running sequence, the scene where Rebecca Ferguson's character, Isla Fast or Ilsa, is that how you pronounce her name? Isla or Elsa, when her character ends up dying, like I felt that sequence was too dragged out, and definitely the ending, the train sequence when Ethan and Grace are trying to survive because each cart is falling off of the bridge. I definitely thought that one just went on and on and on and on as well. But overall, I did still love the movie. I did still enjoy the movie, and I am looking forward to Dead Reckoning Part 2, and I will have to go back and watch the other Mission Impossible movies as well. I'll have to go back and watch Rogue Nation, or not Rogue Nation, Fallout, and what was the other one? Fallout and let me see, Rogue Nation and Fallout. They're the two that I don't think I've seen. So I will have to go back and watch them ones for sure, especially knowing that Rebecca Ferguson and Vanessa Kirby are in them. Pom Klementieff is not, and Haley Atwell is not. I don't think. Maybe I should check that. Maybe she was in the previous one. I didn't think she was, though. I thought Haley Atwell was an addition. Let me see. Mission Impossible. Yeah, okay, yeah. So she was an addition. She was not in any of the other Mission Impossibles that I can see. Let me see. Was she in the old Mission Impossibles? No, not that I can see. She was not in any of the other ones. So Haley Atwell was an addition, and she was a good addition. And I hope that they keep her around. It'd be cool to see her, in Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 2. Well, she will be. She survived this one, so she'll definitely be in that one. And I do think that recently as well, in the real world, Tom Cruise ended up, because this was supposed to be his final hoorah with the Mission Impossible franchise. He wasn't supposed to go any further than Dead Reckoning, but he did recently come out and say and confirm that he would be willing to come back to do more MI movies if as long as everything was good, if the writing was good and whatnot, and if he was, and if the studio wanted to do that, then he did say recently that he would be willing to reprise his role as Ethan Hunt. I don't think Mission Impossible franchise is going anywhere ever, probably, if they keep bringing in the amounts of money that they do bring in. I do think that eventually Tom Cruise will be finished with it, but I think what will happen is they'll eventually have it so that he ends up passing on the mantle to another agent, or maybe they'll have it so he has a son, or maybe they'll just reintroduce a completely different person. Usually whenever they totally recast in franchises, most times it don't work if they totally just do a completely different character. But I do think that if they have this character sort of, pass the mantle on, maybe like with the son, then I think it will work. But whenever you totally just pass the mantle, it never works. You've seen that with the Bourne. With the Bourne franchise, Jeremy Renner sort of ended up taking over. That didn't really go over so well. A lot of the 007 movies, although most of them are successful, every time you have to start over with a new character, it oftentimes feels like it's not as good as the old one. So oftentimes, whenever you just straight up recast somebody, then it sometimes don't work. Like 24 is another great example. The TV show 24, they end up doing like a sort of like a spin-off or like even a sequel series to the main series, which was called 24 Legacy. And they totally recast the main character, and there really wasn't any connection to Jack Bauer or Kiefer Sutherland's character, so that of course wasn't as good either. So whenever you just totally recast someone or just introduce somebody else completely, it never quite does as well, I don't think, as what it would if you keep the originals in there first and then sort of let them hand off the mantle. Sort of like how Hawkeye in Hawkeye, they sort of pass it on to Kate Bishop, Haley Steinfeld's character. But then sometimes that fails as well, like the Star Wars trilogy, episode 8, 9, or was it 7, 8, and 9? Even though they had the original cast there and they handed it off to Rey and the other characters, that was that wasn't done really well either. But I think a lot of that was more so the writing as opposed to the actors or the performance. So either way, I do think Mission Impossible will continue, and I think that even for the most part, Tom Cruise will stay with it as long as he possibly can too. But I do think that eventually they will have to either recast or have it so that he passes the mantle on. And I think that if they want to keep it going and they do decide to keep Mission Impossible going, then they should do it in a way where they don't just simply recast and have a completely different character. They should have it where maybe they branch out and have him either pass on the mantle, or they start doing spin-offs with characters that are already introduced. Like, I could totally see Haley Atwell carrying the franchise for a while, or well, I guess they can't really do it with Rebecca Ferguson now because they killed her in this movie, but like, I would have been able to see her carrying on. But I think Haley Atwell could definitely carry it for sure. I think she's a big enough superstar now where she sort of needs her own franchise. I think it's time that she gets a franchise and whatnot. Be cool to even see a Mission Impossible like HBO series or Apple Plus series. I think they would do a really good job with it as well. But beyond that, I think it would be very interesting to see Dead Reckoning Part 2. And overall, I did like Part 1, and I have no complaints. Like I said, I did get out of the Mission Impossible movies. This was not a movie that I was excited for. I did sort of fall away from the franchise, but I don't regret seeing this one. I did see it, I did enjoy it, and I had a lot of fun. And I am looking forward to Part 2. But anyways, folks, that's our scene-by-scene open spoiler discussion of Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. Let me know down below if you've seen this movie and if you'd like to tell me why or why not. Like I said before, if you're listening to this on the podcast, follow along, click that follow button, and if you're listening to this on the channel, click the subscribe button, and that's pretty well all I got. So until the next podcast.